£100,000 of taxpayers' money to fight for the continued promotion of fluoridation in Southampton. And that's a lot of taxpayers' money. And yet they don't feel obliged to hear the other side coherently presented. Incidentally, I did present most of this information to the Strategic Health Authority, who totally ignored it in their report and came back with their utter junk. Hired a consulting firm to dismiss in a few sentences the National Research Council review and the 18 IQ studies. So yeah, I welcome a level playing field. I welcome the debate. I welcome the scientific exchange. Yes?
Is there a clear path to who's actually making money out of this?
Personally, I don't think it's a money issue. I mean, obviously, there are people making money on this. There are the pharmaceutical industries selling toothpaste. That's fluoride. The phosphate fertilizer. Yeah, but it's not enough money. I don't think the fertilizer industry is a big enough tail to wag this dog. I think it has much more to do with prestige and credibility. I think with public health policy, you need the public's trust. Therefore, you must never waver. They cannot come to you and say, they cannot waver at all about fluoridation, because you need the public's trust and they've got to believe you it's perfectly safe, it's perfectly effective, and you've got to keep that mantra going. And the moment you back off this, then there's a question about whether you can trust your health agencies, whether you can trust the health department, and so on. And then they're worried about what this means for other public health programs like vaccination and so on. So I think what they are protecting right now is their credibility. And to a lesser extent, the American Dental Association may be worried about liabilities. And the end result of this, by the way, is you have to have absolute total confidence as in public health, and you have to have total total confidence from the American Dental Association, British Dental Association, and so on. The end result of that, as I will explain later, is they work backwards. There can never be any study that shows harm of fluoridation. Therefore, of any study that comes along which gives an inkling of a red flag, it must be a junk science. By definition, it's junk science. And opponents of fluoridation, by definition, are junk scientists. This is the only way they can maintain this level of confidence that they have to do. Free amalgams like Sweden and Austria, at the same time that they're trying to pretend there's no science which indicates blah, 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 there's any problem. And you can show, people have shown that the mercury escapes from the surface of these teeth, the mercury amalgams. You can see it if you rub on the mercury amalgams under ultraviolet light. You can see the mercury coming off. They planted mercury amalgams into the sheep and found the mercury is deposited in every tissue in the body. They've done it in monkeys and found the mercury goes into the brain. I mean, it's outrageous, absolutely outrageous. There's only one thing that beats the stupidity of that, and that is to inject organic mercury directly into a child's bloodstream, which is what they do, of course, with thimerosal, the preservative in a number of vaccines. Oh, I could go on. Yes?
Is there a quick way of finding out exactly where in the UK the fluoridation takes place?
Yes, I'm sure if you ask Steve, they will have maps and lists of towns. And also, by the way, Steve and John Spottiswoode over there in those public forums produce lists of tooth decay in towns throughout Britain, and I would challenge anybody to show there was a relationship between these numbers and whether they were fluoridated or not. And what they do is they pull out Birmingham, and they only worry about two towns apparently, Birmingham and Manchester. Those are the two towns they compare, and they're satisfied themselves that Manchester's tooth decay is worse than Birmingham's, and Manchester's not fluoridated, and Birmingham is. Voila! It's proven.
Pressure on Nestle because of the lack of clean drinking water where they produce formula milk abroad.
Yeah.
Perhaps we should be putting pressure on Nestle. Then they might put some pressure themselves on their parties.
Okay. Any ideas are welcome. Yes.
I was going to ask another question actually about fluorosilicate, but can you get proof that hexafluorosilicate actually assists? Because it seems to me that this argument in some ways hinges on that question. If you could prove definitively that the ion stays in water, then that would be more ammo for the argument.
Yes, and people have tried. The other side says it completely dissociates, but what the kink in the argument from their perspective is that the people that did the study at the University of Michigan found that if you lowered the pH into the acid region, at pH 3 there was a complex containing 5 fluoride ions. And it was quite different from fluoride ions. And the response, of course, is, well, we don't fluoridate at pH 3, we fluoridate at pH 7 or close to it. However, what some people have asked is, well, when the fluoride and the hydrated silica is what you get with this dilution of 180,000 to 1, what happens when they get put into soft drinks, which are acidic carbonated drinks? Do you get some recombination? What happens when the hydrated silica and fluoride get into the stomach at a pH 1 to 2? Will they not recombine then? And at the key place, which is during uptake from the stomach lining, etc., is it then silicon pentafluoride? So these are open questions. You've got the 2 epidemiological studies from Masters and Copeland, which showed a greater uptake of lead into children's blood.
Just that the Strategic Health Authority, all they say is that it reverts completely to fluoride.
Yeah, that's what they say. That's what they say. I know, it's the end of it, but yeah, well, they have to, don't they? But the question is, I've just raised some issues which they haven't addressed yet, the possibility of recombination. And incidentally, there was an animal study which looked as if it vindicated Masters and Copeland's work with animals. They dosed animals with fluoride, as hexafluorosilicic acid, with another group of animals with just lead, and then a third group of animals with both fluoride, hexafluorosilicic acid, and lead. And the animals had a greater uptake of lead in the fluoride plus lead than in the other two. So it looks as if fluoride does indeed facilitate the uptake of lead. Whether or not that was a free fluoride ion or hexafluorosilicate ion, I don't know. Yes?
Point. The Director of Public Health, Bristol, who was appointed about 2 years ago, we thought it was a plant to organise a fluoridation scheme for Bristol.
Yes.
In a leaked memo from the council to me,
Yes.
it said Dr. Annett is considering an alternative strategy to support the dental health and welfare of children in Bristol.
Huh?
Now, that was the most astonishing thing I've read in the 40 years I've been studying fluoridation.
You may have found an honest man.
I think I'm
Yes, yes.
On the question of the legality of making people take a medicine if they don't, I wrote to the Department of Health about a year ago, at the time of the previous government, and I naively asked, surely this is illegal to force people to take medicine that they haven't agreed to take. And the reply I got was that under some EU regulation, water is a food, whether fluoridated or not. Those were the actual words. Water is considered a food, whether fluoridated or not. I wondered whether I should ask whether, cyanide in water was also a food.
Yeah. Yeah, they go to extraordinary lengths. I mean, the final resting place for scoundrels is linguistic detoxification in this case. But look, if in European law, if a substance is used to treat a disease, it is a medicine. It may be a nice food, you may want it on your hamburgers, but it is a medicine.
But that is the legal argument they're using.
Well,
that water is a food, whether fluoridated or not.
yeah, it's fascinating, fascinating. Just 3 more. 1, 2, 3, okay? 1, 2, 3. Yes.
You suggested that that the PCTs are actually using their arguments or staying completely rigid on this in order to protect their credibility.
Yes.
I would suggest they're actually doing exactly the opposite because they are refusing to look at scientific evidence.
Yes.
Why should we believe anything the NHS tells us about anything? About MMR
Yeah.
and about
I
swine flu vaccination?
okay, you said, and say no more. Say no more. I agree with you.
We must use that argument.
Yes, we must do this. And I think absolutely what you're saying is if they are interested in protecting their credibility, which they think they are, the quicker they get away from fluoridation and remove themselves from this, the more credibility that they have. They're doing, what do they call it? Camazon, well, I don't know. Oh, yeah, what are those things, yeah. Well, I say no more, say no more, say no more. I was at college with John Cleese. Okay.
Every time I've written to the Department of Health or the Secretary of State, they keep hiding behind the fact that this judicial review is in November. So whatever arguments put forward about the legality of it, of breaking European law, about medicines, the answer always comes back as a judicial review in November.
Yes, yes, I love it. It's like a play. What's that play? Waiting for Godot? There's always a Godot that we have to wait for, which keeps it going for another year or so. Yes?
You showed us a graph earlier in New Zealand,
Yes.
which showed the tooth decay coming down,
Yes.
and that not changing at all when fluoridation came in.
Yes.
I'm assuming because the graph kept going, the government didn't do anything when that information was available to them, and that there's still fluoride now.
Oh, yes, yes. They ignore all this stuff.
So what you're saying then is if this does come in, we've either got to spend 10,000 on a system to clean it up, or we've got to move to a different part of the country.
Yeah.
It's never going to go back out again.
No, it's very difficult. It's much more difficult, much easier to keep it out than get it out once it's in. We know that in the United States. We have quite a number of communities that have stopped, which have not started when they had the pressure put on them, even when they were outspent 10 or 20 to 1 by the proponents, who usually have a lot of money. They've still prevailed. So we can keep it out, but getting it out is much more difficult. I must go on, otherwise we will go beyond 4 o'clock. So we'll have more time at the end for more questions. So let me skip quickly through this. The great fluoridation gamble was essentially, they knew that fluoride would cause dental fluorosis, this mottling of the enamel. And they knew that that was a systemic effect and an internal mechanism. And so the gamble that was taken is that fluoride could do this, visibly damage the growing tooth cells in this way by some internal biochemical mechanism without doing any other damage to the child's developing body. That was the gamble that was taken. In my view, it's highly unlikely if you can zero in on a chemical only impacting one tissue and leaving all the rest alone. So part one of the fluoridation gamble examines the history between 31, when they discovered that fluoride did cause what we now call dental fluorosis, which was then called dental mottling, and 1950, when the US Public Health Service endorsed fluoridation. So this year, 1950, is a very special year, because why did the US Public Health Service endorse fluoridation before any trials for effectiveness had been completed, and before there had been anything but a minuscule number of health studies published? There was practically no evidence whatsoever. So this wasn't a scientific judgment in 1950. Something else was influencing it. In that chapter, we talk about some of the industrial interests that were going on. But if you're interested in that, Chris Bryson's book is much better. And then the answer is how much evidence do they have? Very, very little. The next next chapter, we look at what happened after 1950. We looked at the history then, and it became very clear that after the Public Health Service had endorsed fluoridation, things very rapidly fossilized. Fluoridation was safe and effective. From that moment onwards, mines were closed. It was written in stone. It then becomes virtually a religion at this point. Not only does fluoride not cause harm, but you will never, ever, 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 ever find a study that will show harm. So now let me go on to perhaps the answer that the area that many of you, I'm sure, are interested in is the evidence of harm. Well, dental fluorosis, I'm going to do these one at a time, so there's no point in me actually reading these, but you can see it's quite substantial. We go through a lot of things here. And so let's start with dental fluorosis. As I mentioned, early promoters thought that at 1 part per million, they could limit dental fluorosis to 10% of children in its very mild form. Run the clock forward to 1987, and the data showed that nearly 30% of children in fluoridated communities had some level of dental fluorosis. So they're out by a factor of 3 times more dental fluorosis than they had anticipated. Why? Because there are many other sources of fluoride that they didn't take into account. When you break it down into the level of severity, this is very mild, this is moderate, this is severe. they did not expect to find anything here or anything here. But these figures show that 1%, over 1% of American children had their enamel, 100% of their enamel surface impacted by fluoride. And that requires treatment of over $1,000 a tooth, and there's no help given